Hello, I'm Tomix. I'm a huge roller coaster enthusiast, which is surprisingly common worldwide. There's lots of us excitedly riding and counting every roller coaster in sight, with many large communities, trips, and conventions for coaster enthusiasts. There's just one problem: we can't seem to agree on what a roller coaster is. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's stuff that most people clearly agree is a roller coaster, and there's stuff that clearly isn't, but the middle ground is an absurdly huge battleground of gray area that fans feel very strongly about. The reason this matters is mostly because coaster nerds like me love to count how many coasters we've been on, with many of us even keeping a coaster count, and parks love to advertise how many coasters they have. It is insane how frequently this conflict comes up in the coaster enthusiast community. It's actually such a widespread problem that I thought even people who aren't into roller coasters as a field of interest might be amused to learn about this. So I'm making this video. This is basically our version of is a hot dog a sandwich? A debate that at first glance you feel should take 5 seconds to 10 minutes tops, but if you ask it in a room with more than 2 people in it, 2 hours later you're still on the subject, people are yelling, chairs are flying, and a divorce lawyer has been contacted. So why can't we agree on it? A roller coaster seems like it's a pretty simple thing to define, right? Well, if I was speaking to you one-on-one, this is the part where I'd ask you to define what a coaster is, and then based on what you'd said, I'd present you with an exception to the rule. But since it's a YouTube video, we're going to start with the Wikipedia definition of what a roller coaster is, and you can either watch me break that down in a normal video style, or jump around to the timestamps based on if you think it's a coaster or not, and I'll try to throw a wrench in your logic. So Wikipedia says, a roller coaster is a type of amusement ride employing a form of elevated railroad track. Well, let me stop you right there. We're not even halfway through the definition, and we've already hit an obstacle. Now, even if we stretch the definition of railroad track to stuff that doesn't look anything like a railroad, because most coaster tracks don't look anything like the sort of tracks trains ride around on, and even if we're really generous with the definition so it still includes single rail coasters, or whatever this is, simply because they use rails, this definition implies that bobsled coasters, which are generally agreed to be coasters, aren't, simply because they ride around in a giant slide swinging freely from side to side. The only time they're on any kind of rail is when they're going up a lift hill or hitting the brakes, but every amusement park game out there, from Roller Coaster Tycoon to Planet Coaster, lists them as roller coasters. Most coaster enthusiasts count them on their little list that they keep for their coaster count, and generally speaking, if you went up to someone at an amusement park, pointed to a bobsled ride, and asked them what kind of ride is that, most people would say it's a roller coaster. So, what makes them a roller coaster? Well, they're still large thrill rides that twist and turn on a giant elevated track that goes up and down. Okay, so are water slides roller coasters then? They fit the definition? Obviously not, right? Water slides are water slides. A water slide is widely agreed on as not being a roller coaster. Well, what if it goes up once as well as down? It's still a water slide, right? Not a roller coaster. It's just a slide inspired by a roller coaster. Or alternatively, if you think this does make it a roller coaster, does that mean a slip and fly is a roller coaster? I mean, you go both down and up, but let's say one uphill segment does not make a coaster. What about a lot of uphill segments on a long track that goes up and down and all around? At what point does it stop being a water slide and become a roller coaster? Is this still not a coaster? Why? Is it the water? Because some roller coasters use water. There's multiple kinds of water coasters out there which people totally agree are coasters. They ride around on a track going up and down and all around before splashing down and floating around the rest of the track like a boat. That's a coaster, right? Well, okay, because I can't actually hear your opinion and I have to assume what it is, let's assume you agree with me that a water coaster is a roller coaster and water slides are water slides. You can look at a thing and say, that is a roller coaster, that is a water slide, and that's good enough for you. Well, what about log flumes? Most people agree they're not roller coasters, they're boat rides. Sure, they have drops, but for the most part they're just kind of floating around like boats. They're boat rides. Well, what about Dive to Atlantis? A ride that, for all intents and purposes, was a log flume, but had one uphill rail section like a roller coaster. The entire rest of the track is a very standard log floating around a track type boat ride. Do you think it's enough to make it a coaster? Well, congratulations! If you said yes, you just agreed that Splash Mountain, arguably the most famous log flume in the world, is in fact a roller coaster rather than a log flume. It has one single uphill segment hidden in the mountain. Most coaster nerds counting how many coasters they've been on would never think to consider Splash Mountain or Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls on their list simply because of one small uphill segment. Clearly they're still log flumes. If you agree that a log flume can't be a coaster, well, at what point does a boat ride become a roller coaster? How many times does it have to go uphill or make turns before it counts as one? Where does the line between a water coaster and a boat ride lie? Is this not a coaster simply because it has a water segment? What about this thing? Or this thing? How big or how minor does a coaster's interaction with water have to be before it stops being a coaster? That's so unclear and difficult to define with tons of contradictory evidence, and yet coaster nerds seem to generally know which of these counts as a coaster and which one doesn't. So presumably the crux of it is not here, it's in another part of the definition. So let's move on with the rest of the Wikipedia definition. A roller coaster is a type of amusement ride employing a form of elevated railroad track that carries passengers on a train... Wait. A train as in multiple connected cars? There is a ridiculous amount of coasters in the world that only have one car. Is this not a coaster? Is this not a coaster? Pretty sure anyone looking at them would refer to them as roller coasters. Maybe it's a combination of both. A ride has to have either rails or a large train, but it can't have neither, because then you just end up with water slides again. So is Lava Bora not a roller coaster? It's just one car going around the track, but that track goes up and down and turns and everything. Most parks, tycoon games, and visitors would count it as a roller coaster. Most coaster nerds would count it on their list. Cedar Point used to hold the world record for most roller coasters in the world, with Disaster Transport being one of them, a similar ride to Lava Bora. This was a Guinness World Record, documented in everything. The wide agreement is that there goes a roller coaster. If you still think bobsled coasters and Lava Bora are not coasters, you should know that in general, the use of rails in coasters is a lot less of a clear-cut indicator of a roller coaster than you might think. For example, Virginia reel coasters, a historic coaster type, was not defined by riding on rails, but more so by being kept in line by barriers on the sides, with the track below being a relatively smooth, plain piece of track. Are they not coasters just because they don't ride on rails? Well, what if I told you some of them did? Practically the same ride, just a difference in what you ride on and how much the cars are kept in line. These were the predecessor to modern spinning wild mouse rides. And honestly, whatever your answer was to the Virginia reel thing, what about Slope Shooter? One of the most debatable credits in the coaster world. It has a sort of coasterish lift hill like a bobsled ride, but it largely just rolls down on concrete down a hillside with barriers directing cars where they need to go, with the track often being much wider than the narrow track typically associated with keeping a coaster in line. It's pretty much just one mechanism away from being a Red Bull soapbox derby race. It's listed in the roller coaster database, and it uses the same barrier mechanism as Virginia reels or side friction rides, but many people would say this is completely its own thing and not a coaster. But hey, if you still think this is a coaster, then why are alpine slides not considered coasters? They're a common type of slide you can usually find as tourist attractions in mountain regions. They're clearly thrill rides with a winding track, but generally they're just kind of considered slides that you ride a cart through. Ah, well, you see, the average amusement park nerd would say, they're not coasters since you control how fast you go. Okay, so what about single rail alpine slides? They're on an actual physical rail, but you control how fast you go. Or what about this? You're telling me that this isn't a roller coaster? It has a lift hill, it twists, turns, looks like a railway. Literally the only thing that separates this from a roller coaster is that you can control your speed. Is this not a roller coaster? Well, actually, some enthusiasts don't consider alpine slides like this to be roller coasters. To which I say, what about Alpine Bob at Altmole, Germany? In what frickin' planet is this not a roller coaster? I mean, I don't think you can actually control your speed while you're riding it, but at this point, does it even matter when structurally it is identical to every alpine coaster out there? The track is the same track, the cars are pretty much the same cars, the layouts are largely similar in most of them, even if some run close to the ground and some are higher up in the air. Given their similarities, can you really say that one of these is a coaster and one of these isn't simply because of how much control you have over the speed? Is the ability to brake, therefore changing the speed, what makes it not a coaster? Because if so, what about Ruchabon in Tivoli Gardens? A coaster so old that to make sure it doesn't fly off the track, the park hires a brakeman to sit at the back and regulate the speed of the coaster as needed, much like other large coasters of its time. Does that one count as a coaster just because the person controlling the speed is a park employee rather than the person riding? Or is there some kind of bias against alpine coasters here? Actually, you know what? Here's a quiz for the coaster fans in the audience. What's the world's longest roller coaster? Based on when you're watching this video, most would probably say it's Falcon's Flight at Six Flags Qiddiya. It is the Guinness World Record holder, after all, a fact that the park greatly advertises, except Tobotronc at Natureland in frickin' Andorra is a whopping 3,445 feet, or 1 full kilometer longer. Why does it not hold the record? Well, Or heck, if you do think alpine slides and slope shooter are coasters, even if they're basically just slides you ride a cart through, what if I were to take a little container box with wheels to the local park, put on a helmet, and ride it down the slide? Did I just create a roller coaster? Do I add this to my coaster count? Are actual bobsled tracks, the ones from the Olympics, roller coasters? Where exactly is the line? As for me, I think this is a roller coaster, and this isn't, because one is on rails and one is a slide. But then that brings us back to bobsled coasters, which I do consider a coaster, and I couldn't tell you where the logic difference lies. One just feels coastery enough, and the other doesn't? Okay, you know what? Forget this entire train of thought. Let's go to the next part of the Wikipedia definition. Elevated railroad track that carries passengers on a train through tight turns. Wait, but forget tight turns. Some coasters never turn at all. Like Superman the Escape at Six Flags Magic Mountain, Tower of Terror in Australia, half-pipe coasters, any show loop coaster in existence, Togo Ultra Twisters, Linear Gale, they're all built in more or less a straight line, using either switch track or traveling backwards as a means to get back to their stations. Heck, the first modern roller coaster ever, Switchback Railway, was linear. No, but they do turn. They turn up and down. Okay, so are first-generation Intamin drop towers roller coasters? They're the first modern drop tower rides, generally considered a flat ride, and not counted on pretty much anyone's list. But they have rails that curve upwards? Does that not make them a coaster? The layout is nearly identical to Tower of Terror or Superman the Escape. Heck, it uses a lift hill when those are launched coasters. Arguably, it's more of a roller coaster than they are. If you said no, then why? How is this different from a Heartline coaster or a Switchback? If you said yes, then are rocking tug rides roller coasters? They use rails that curve up and down. Most people would look at you like a weirdo if you said yes. It's more similar to a pirate ship or a frisbee ride than a roller coaster, except instead of swinging back and forth from something, it swings back and forth on something. So let's say you think rocking tugs are a coaster. Is anything with an up and down track a roller coaster? Are these toys for kids a roller coaster? Is a railing at a skate park for people to grind on a roller coaster? Is the wheelchair lift at your local government building a roller coaster? It has rails, it curves up and down. I mean, obviously it's a mobility aid, not an amusement ride, but structurally, is this a roller coaster? No? Why not? Is it because it's powered and travels at a steady speed? Because there's roller coasters that do that. Which, by the way, some people don't consider these roller coasters. Which, really? Well, yeah, a roller coaster has to coast. It's in the name. Okay, but you're really telling me if you were next to this and someone said, I want to ride the roller coaster, you wouldn't know they clearly mean this thing? Would you correct them that it's not a coaster but a powered coaster? Jeez, you're one of those folks who yell at people that white chocolate isn't real chocolate unprompted whenever they dare enjoy one, aren't you? I mean, sure, you can be a purist and decide that anything that is even slightly off definition doesn't count. Each of these is a different kind of ride that's separate from all the others. Whatever a ride is the most similar to out of these is what it actually counts as. Well, putting aside the fact that the word coaster is listed here like 6 times among all these things that you say aren't coasters, I think wherever you decide to draw the line between these categories, there's gonna be rides that blur it. Either being a 50-50 type situation, sitting right between two definitions, or stuff that doesn't meet the criteria you set for a category but is so close that it seems silly that other similar things are included and they're not. For example, if you agree with most people that a rocking tug isn't a coaster, but a flat ride that just happens to utilize rails, then you probably agree that a disco ride is also not a roller coaster. It's just a ride that utilizes rails, right? Okay, so remember all those linear coasters that I mentioned earlier? Especially half-pipe coasters? Why is a half-pipe coaster considered a coaster, but a disco ride isn't? The roller coaster database lists half-pipe coasters as such, but does not list disco rides. One counts, one doesn't. Why? Heck, newer disco rides even have an extra hill in them, but they're still not considered coasters by most. They still feel more like a ride that uses rails rather than a proper coaster. But then they started making these kinds of rides that also have turns. Are they coasters now that they have turns? No? Why? What about 2 turns? Exactly how long and twisty does a ride have to be before it stops being a flat ride with rails and start being a roller coaster? Okay, so either way, we've established that turning is probably not what makes a coaster a coaster. So what the heck is next? A roller coaster is a type of amusement ride employing a form of elevated railroad track that carries passengers on a train through tight turns, steep slopes, kiddie coasters are a thing. Do I even need to elaborate on this one? It does say later in the definition that some coasters are designed to produce a gentler experience, but that still leaves what a coaster is as pretty dang undefined. So what does define a roller coaster? I mean, remember, something can't just be kind of a coaster. Well, clearly it can, but for any park or person that wants to count how many coasters are in a park or on a list, you need a definition of what counts and what doesn't count. It's a binary thing. So what definition does fly? Basically, the only specific parts of the Wikipedia definition that we haven't disproven to some extent or another is that a roller coaster is an amusement ride that carries passengers. So I guess coasters that never opened aren't coasters? Okay. But that basically just means any ride is a roller coaster, except it isn't. I don't think anyone that's not trying to be difficult on purpose would think a merry-go-round is a coaster. So I would dare add to the definition myself that a roller coaster is an amusement ride that travels along some sort of constructed track with a notable curvature and difference in incline. There you go, Wikipedia, I fixed it for you. Except there's still non-coaster rides that fit that definition too. Well, then what frickin' definition does work? Well, the metric we used most in this video, and the one I think works best, is if I was in a park and I asked someone what is this and pointed at the thing, how likely would they be to describe it as a roller coaster? But one, I don't think you can scientifically define a category with the term pointed at the thing and ask someone if it's the thing, and if they said yes, then it's the thing. And two, that opens multiple new cans of worms, because, like, if I were to point at a Bayern curve ride and ask people what is that, I think there's a decent chance that the average person would say it's a roller coaster, even though most enthusiasts would agree that it isn't. It's no more a coaster than, say, a Ring of Fire ride, which looks like a coaster, although it's actually built out of a whole bunch of pieces connected together into one long ring that has seats attached to it and gets spun around like, say, a big centerless Ferris wheel, which most people would agree is not a coaster. If you count all of these as a coaster, then I send you back to the whole rocking tug thing. If you think that it isn't a coaster, well, what about Tidal Twister at SeaWorld? It works largely the same as a Bayern curve, except it's a little twistier and goes upside down. No? What about Skyline Skywarp rides? They're basically a Ring of Fire that curves. Most park goers would probably count Bayern curves and Ring of Fire rides as coasters if you pointed at them and asked them what they are, but most enthusiasts or parks advertising the number of coasters they have wouldn't, viewing these as flat rides. Why? Well, you see, reasons. So many reasons, which I definitely know. Maybe it's because they're located in the flat rides menu in most amusement park games, but how'd they end up there? I don't know. Is it because they're always built with one specific layout? So are boomerang coasters, but those are usually located in the coaster menu in most games. So are amusement parks and coaster enthusiasts the ones deciding what a coaster is or isn't? That seems pretty gatekeepy, but hey, let's be real, this entire thing is basically recreational gatekeeping for the sake of a thought experiment. So let's just assume for a moment that, yeah, sure, they do. Well then, that leads us to one of the most heavily contested issues in the coaster fandom: racing coasters. Racing coasters are when there are two or more tracks next to one another with trains running on both at the same time to see which side reaches the brakes first and wins the race. A lot of people count these as one coaster, even if the two tracks are completely separate from one another. If you were to build these in a video game, you would have to put down two coasters, but a lot of people say it counts as one, with each side being half a credit. Many say, well, it's under the same name, or they share an entrance, so it's one coaster. But some racing coasters have a separate name or entrance for each side. This mentality can result in a whole bunch of coaster nerds saying they've been on 75.5 coasters, so it can be a little silly, especially since if I've only ridden one side of a steeplechase coaster, does that mean I've not ridden the steeplechase? I know what it feels like to ride the steeplechase, I've physically been on it, I've seen the visuals, I've just only ridden one track out of 3, which are largely identical. Does it really not count until I've been on all 3? Or does it count, but only count as one no matter how many sides I've been on? Well, if that's what you think, what if there were small variations in the layout between the two sides? A place where one side goes right and the other goes left, but otherwise they're mostly the same. What if one side rides forward and the other side rides backwards? The layout is the same, but the ride experience is wildly different. What if there were really big variations in the layout? Hell, what if the two coasters were what we call dueling coasters, which are basically two completely different layouts that interact with each other and still do the racing trains thing from beginning to end, but one side could be a crazy inverted looping thrill coaster and the other is a more laid-back standard sit-down family coaster? Are they still just one coaster because they share a name? Will riding one count as having ridden the other, even though they're completely different experiences? Where is the line? Or if you think each side is its own coaster since they're two separate tracks, what about Mobius coasters like the Racer at Kennywood? Mobius coasters are racing coasters that are functionally identical on both sides, except they're one track. If you start the ride on one side, you end it on the other side. Despite looking like two coasters side by side, it's all one big continuous loop. Is it still two coasters or just one? If I've ridden one side, does it count as having ridden the coaster, or is it just a half credit and I have to ride both sides? Or what about Mamanga Standing and Loop Coaster over at Yomiuri Land in Japan? It literally only used one track, but one train would be a normal train, while the other you ride standing up. They're arguably pretty different experiences. Do they count as 2 credits or 1? I mean, they're still only one track, but very different rides. If I've ridden only the sitting down side, can I really list this coaster as something I've ridden since I haven't experienced it fully? Well, if you say that's 2 different credits, what about rides like DC Rivals, where it's one track, one kind of train, pretty straightforward that it's one coaster, but 2 of the seats are turned backwards for people who want to pay extra for an added thrill? Is that a completely different credit? If not, why is Loop Coaster 2 credits and this is just 1? Or if you do think it's a separate credit because the experience is different, what with you sitting facing a whole new direction, well, what about spinning coasters where the cars spin freely? Arguably, every time you ride one of those, the experience is different and you face different directions. But most people would only count them as one coaster. It's the same different experience each time. But there's rides that blur that line, with Fury at Bobby Ann Land straight up opening it to an interactive vote in the ride on which way the car should face during the ride. Also, what about relocated coasters? If I've ridden the Scream of Theseus over in one park, then it gets sold to a park in another country and I go and ride it there. Is it a new credit? If you said yes, what about traveling fairs? Olympia Looping travels between countries all the time, but always returns to the same locations. Is it a new credit each time? Why do coasters in amusement parks sometimes count as new credits when they get relocated, but traveling fair coasters don't? And how far does a coaster have to go before it counts as a new coaster? A ride from China being relocated to California may be considered a new credit by some, but I doubt they'd consider it a new ride if it was just moved to the other side of the same park. But hey, relocated rides aren't new rides. They're literally the same ride, just in a different location, right? Well, then what if in addition to moving it halfway across the globe, they also completely retheme it, rename it, add effects, and turn it into a completely different experience with a new name than what it was originally? Is it still the same coaster then? If so, then what if they did all that while leaving it right where it was? Is the Scream of Theseus still the same coaster if they completely overhaul it right where it stands? What if they literally rip out the old track and replace it with a new one? Hades had a part of it removed and turned into an inversion, as well as having a rough patch of its layout retracked. It was given a new name, Hades 360, but other than that, it's still essentially the same. Is it a new credit? It's just one difference, so probably not, but then what of Phantom's Revenge, which was known as Steel Phantom before they removed all the loops and replaced them with a bunch of different elements? A much bigger change. Is it still the same coaster? If so, then why are RMC coasters, where they take an old wooden coaster, rip out the old track, and replace it with a crazy new steel layout built over the same structure, typically considered a new separate coaster? What about Zonga? The ride has been relocated a bunch of times, but it also had its layout slightly modified to lower the G-forces. At a quick glance, you can't tell the difference. The layout is still largely the same. It's all a matter of small changes in angles. The ride experience is still pretty much the same thing, but the track is no longer the same track. Is it still Zonga? So let's say what determines what makes a coaster different is the experience. If the experience is largely the same, it's still the same coaster. Well, then what about clones? Wacky worm coasters are extremely common around the world. Chances are you have one right next to where you live, and the experience in them is largely the same. Barring a few exceptions, if you've ridden one wacky worm, you've ridden them all. So, do all wacky worm coasters around the world only count as one coaster? I mean, the experience is the same, the layout is the same, it's just that the parts are different. No, you say, they're separate coasters because they're literally separate? Then why are coasters that underwent a retracking considered the same? Same ride experience, different parts. For simplicity's sake, a lot of people just let websites like the Roller Coaster Database or Coaster List apps decide what is or isn't a coaster for them. Except, those usually don't list fairground coasters and have a lot of contradictions between what is or isn't listed, as we've mentioned. The truth is, none of these criteria define what a coaster is, and all of them do. Everyone counts what a roller coaster is differently, usually based on a mix of all these criteria. Some arbitrary line drawn in the sand, and good old I knows one when I sees one. While I say I've ridden 192 coasters, by someone else's standards that number can be higher or lower by like 20 in either direction. It's almost like labels often aren't reflective of a much more complicated reality and everything is on a spectrum. Happy Pride Month, everybody! However, while labels don't define the world, and many things might not fit neatly under any of them, they're useful when it comes to discussing things broadly, cataloging, or keeping stupid lists for fun. And many coaster nerds love to celebrate milestones like their 200th coaster. And just like your 40th birthday, it might not actually matter in any really significant way, but it's a nice, round, meaningful milestone to you. Then in the same manner, to me, it would be a big deal when I've ridden my 200th coaster. Well then, if it's all just arbitrary and just goes to count how many coasters you've been on, why not count everything as a coaster? Who needs all these quandaries and stupid gatekeeping that can easily be solved by just going, yeah, no, that's a coaster too? I mean, the whole point of this is basically to swing your junk around and go, yeah, look at how much I've ridden, isn't it? So why not loosen the restrictions as much as possible and just count everything? This is a coaster, that is a coaster, that's 3 coasters, or 6 if they move it 2 inches to the left. That little train at the mall, that's a coaster. That train that rides around on concrete at the zoo, coaster. That train you ride to work each day, that's a new coaster each time you ride it. Why not just do that? Your park has 68 rides in it, call them all coasters, even this thing. Hell, 69 coasters if you use a mobility scooter. Call the Guinness Book of World Records and become the new record holder for most coasters in the world. Why the heck not? There's no clear definition, it's all subjective, right? Well, the more you loosen the restrictions, the less impressive having a high number is, so most people in parks will at least try to be reasonable about it, because, well, otherwise it just defeats the purpose of even keeping count to begin with. So we're all forced to just accept this nebulous non-definition of I know one when I see one, and accept that other people's idea of what that means could be different from ours, and that's okay. Because not only is acceptance important, but also, if you get too loose with restrictions, you risk going down a dark path. You risk becoming the people that upload videos from slingshot rides to YouTube and call them hilarious roller coaster fails. And those guys are objectively wrong. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please let me know. Not because of the algorithm, I just genuinely want to know what you think. Until next time, I've been Tomix, I currently am Tomix, and will hopefully continue to be Tomix. And I will see you in the next video. Bye! Until then, feel free to check these other videos out. No idea what it's recommending to you guys. My channel's kind of all over the place. I kind of do what I want. I hope you like them. Oh, and if you got redirected to this part of the video, you're just being difficult on purpose, and all I have to say to you is